Well, I can tell you straight away why I didn't get shortlisted. All you have to do is look at the title. The odds of a blank monochrome winning the Archibald is 0, but that's not the reason why I entered the Archibald. 2 reasons are there at the bottom, and one was I made a commitment when I turned 70 8 years ago that I was going to do certain things, one of which was going to enter the Archibald before I turned 80. So, tick. The other one is I wanted to do it as an extension of the exhibition we've got at the moment, because really most people are really intimidated by minimalism and monochromes, and they say, what does it mean? And a lot of times you can't actually answer. And so I thought, well, if you can't answer that, then what's the big deal of doing a portrait as a monochrome? So we'll see what the journey takes us. So here we have the first monochrome probably ever painted, which was by Kazimir Malevich, which is in the top corner, where normally the Russians place their religious icons. And this is a painting that you'll see upstairs by Kalmanychenko, which is not a Russian name, it's actually a Polish name, it's actually Ukrainian, and it was my name before my birth name. And so both my parents actually survived the Holocaust by escaping to Russia, and they both speak fluent Russian. So that's about as close to Malevich as I got before I came to Australia. Okay, so this is the structure of the talk. It's going to be, just to give you some context with regard to what the Archibald is, what are self-portraits, an analysis of my Archibald, what prompted it and how to understand it, and then how it fits into the exhibition. So this is the Archibald, it's over 100 years old. It's not regarded highly in terms of the art. It's sort of an event similar to Melbourne Cup, and so it's very populist, and I think that's the intent, and they have huge crowds. It sort of runs at the Gallery of New South Wales from May to September, and then it tours regionally for till the following September. So it's on for a long time, and over 500,000 people visit it. And the rules to enter the Archibald are quite simple. Basically, you have to be you have to have lived in Australia for the last 12 months, and it has to be a painting. It has to be of someone who's well known, which is not mandatory, and anyone can enter. And also, the judges are the trustees, not the art personnel. So this is an example of some of the past winners, which you can see are really quite diverse. And although it's quite populist and people sort of tend to look down on the Archibald, it hasn't stopped people suing the Art Gallery of New South Wales because some of the entries they believe didn't follow the rules of the game. Now, portraiture is a big deal. People are really fascinated by portraiture, and if you have a look at these are the art prizes in Australia which dominate portraiture. I think they would outclass any other medium or genre, and you sort of wonder what this fascination is with regard to portraiture, which is one of the themes that we'll be looking at. They even recently built a National Portrait Gallery similar to the one in London and in Washington, where sort of personalities and sort of noted people are collected. And also portraits are painted of all Prime Ministers, and also the War Memorial paints portraits of all the VC. Yeah, they've got a problem with Ben Roberts-Smith at the moment, his portrait. So, this is the first portrait ever painted. It's 40,000 years old, and it's in El Castillo in Spain. And it doesn't look like a self-portrait, but it is a portrait of a self. And when you think about it, 40,000 years ago, which is sort of like at the beginning of humanity, active humanity. In fact, this was done by a Neanderthal. And this is before technology, even before architecture. They were living in caves. They had no tools, you know. It's nothing to the life that we have today. And what were they saying? Because one of the first things that they were saying, they were actually making a mark about their existence. I am here. I exist. I am alive. And in fact, that's what a lot is the characterisation of portraiture. Moving along, you get self-portraits by artists. In fact, artists were the only people that actually did self-portraits for quite a while, because I suppose all the amateur self-portraits weren't surviving. And this is Rembrandt, one of the great painters, and he painted 40 self-portraits throughout his life. And most of the time they did it to practice. And it's interesting that portraiture is not a very popular genre that's collected by collectors, unless it's a very famous artist or a very famous personality. But he painted 40, and in his estate there were no portraits left, so they were acquired. But this is a very famous portrait by Velasquez, and it's a portrait of the King and Queen's daughter, and you can see in the background there's a mirror with the King and Queen sort of capturing their reflection as if they're standing in front of the portrait. But what's really cheeky about this, the main character in the portrait is the artist. It's a self-portrait of the artist, right? He suckered his boss into giving him the commission. But, and it's as if he's saying, because he was really a high-class servant in that household. And what he's saying is, it's because of me that you will be remembered in perpetuity because of this portrait. So here with Picasso, he's not actually tracing his life through his aging process, but through his practice as he's actually evolved in the sort of abstract representation that he was famous for. And with photography, you could see one of the great photographers, Robert Mapplethorpe, who was gay. And so the idea of identity, which is a really important aspect, and within the sort of life that he led, you know, the sort of challenges with regard to identity, which is even relevant today. And you can see here in all these different guises that he actually presented himself. And this last one here, which is just before he died of AIDS. And then we have someone like Cindy Sherman. These are self-portraits, but her practice is self-portrait, but they're not self-portraits of her. They're self-portraits of make-believe, as she takes on these different personas. And she does her own makeup and her own posing, and she has a whole series of themes of Hollywood actresses and show business and the circus and entertainers. And I don't think I've seen a self-portrait of her as she is. So it really questions about how artists actually use portraiture to represent themselves. But for rank and file people, portraiture has always been important with regard to memorialisation. So on the left we have a sort of a palace with all the past generations of portraits. But even today in our own homes, you know, we have photographs hanging on the walls, so sort of memorialising the people in our family and our friends, and also events that have taken place. And that's been made possible with the invention of the camera. And on the left you'll see the sort of history of the camera. And one of the characters who, when photography first invented, you actually needed professional photographers because photography is really quite complex. And but you see rapidly how the technology changed to the point where the man in the street could actually not only operate a camera but also could afford photography. And and sort of the image became so prevalent that actually it became a dominant part of our identity. So with passports and driver's license, in some countries they have identity cards. And what that presupposes is that the reason someone's face can become their identity is the presumption that everyone's face is unique. Now, when we move along with the invention of the internet and the digital world, you can see that that sort of started from about 1990 and to the point where we have here social media and smartphones that totally revolutionised the way the human image was actually utilised. And to the point where not only did it have capturing your identity, but that identity became then a means of security. So here we have passport going through the customs, and here we have the phone where it has face recognition to open up the phone, and also for your banking, and but really at the end of the day, it's a selfie which has become the main result of the digital age. So, but selfie existed before. You may remember with photography, they had these booths where you could actually take your selfie, but that quickly got surpassed by the digital camera. And you can see what's happened is this is Mo Salah in a recent game of Liverpool versus Tottenham. In the middle of the game, he jumped out, grabbed a supporter's camera and took a selfie after he scored a goal in the middle of the game, and that has gone viral. I think overnight there were millions of viewings, and it was sort of capturing that moment. But I think really this is where the selfie sort of comes into its own, where today there are 3.2 billion selfies posted daily. Daily. Okay? And you sort of ask yourself, why? Why? Well, these are some of the reasons you can see. These are the positive reasons, and there's also the negative consequences of that with regard to narcissism, sort of feelings of self-worth, addiction, but that's what people are doing. So now, in terms of the self-portrait or portraiture, this is the dominant medium. So you can understand why I called my work Selfie. Okay, so what is a portrait? This is a definition by Aristotle. And I think that even today, that is regarded as the sort of ideal of what a portrait should be. It's more than just a superficial likeness. Somehow the portrait needs to capture or project the essence or character of the subject. And what is a self-portrait? No. How are you, or how am I, in this particular case, portrayed? And there's all these options. And the reality is, there is no single persona that represents you, because all the people you interact with see you differently. Your parents see you differently to your children. They see you differently to your co-workers, to your friends, to people in the street, to strangers. So which of those personas do you present as part of your portrait? So for inspiration, I took this work by Joseph Kosuth, who is a conceptual artist. And in 1965, while he was still a student, he did this work in a museum where he put a chair, and next to it he put a full-size photo of that chair, and on the other side he had a dictionary definition of a chair. So he had three versions of a chair, and each of them actually stood alone, but collectively they gave you a full picture. And depending on the context as to which of those options you would use, and what it's identifying is the sort of multiplicity of identifying something or presenting something or representing something. And you can see here there's sort of three categories: the physical, visual, and the verbal. Now, The Art Gallery of New South Wales has got another version of his because he applied that to all sorts of different objects, you know, so tables and brooms and utensils and things like this. But also, interestingly, Brett Whiteley in 1978 won the Archibald with a triptych which did the same thing. He had a photograph up here, he had a painting of himself, semi-abstracted, and then he had another painting of a baboon screaming with his foot nailed to the floor. And what he was representing himself in 3 different dimensions. So this was him as a person, this was him as an artist, and this was him as a heroin addict. Now you think with these 2 works, my entry would have been a shoo-in. Really, you think about it. Like, in terms of precedence, you cannot get much stronger, right? And unfortunately the world doesn't work like that. So, so this is the work, and so it's in 3 parts. So we've got the selfie, the portrait. So these 2 works on the side, the selfie and the CV, are actually photographs. So they don't count. The only one that counts is the one in the middle. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go on a journey to sort of work out what's going on here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you some background on selfies, a background on the CV, and some background on the monochrome. So we'll start off with the... now, as it happened in 2017, when I turned 70 and made this commitment, I happened to be in London, and Saatchi Gallery had this amazing exhibition on selfie, one of the best exhibitions I've been to. And what's amazing about it, it was sort of like 7 years or 7 to 10 years after selfies actually came on the scene. And it had such a dominant effect. Like at the time, I think there's something like 90 million selfies posted per day. And between then and now, it's grown to about 3 billion. And so they were looking at different aspects of the selfie, and they had, it was just fantastic. In fact, I've got the catalogue upstairs. You can have a look at it when you look at it. So, so again, what they were doing is they were sort of looking at the selfie, both from the perspective of what it is today, but how it related to self-portraits historically. And this was fantastic. So basically what they did is they took all the major self-portraits by artists and actually mounted them onto TV screens to look like iPhones. And next to it, they had a little device where you actually could click whether you liked it or not. And then they had another show where they had all these characters who actually posted selfies. So even when you were in space, you had a selfie. Even the monkey could take a selfie, and Obama could take a selfie. And then they had another exhibition where this character actually started taking selfies even before the digital world with celebrities. So that's another aspect of selfies, is actually sort of appropriated celebrity by depending on who you take a photo with. Okay, so with the CV, one of the real struggles I had with the CV is what is an equivalent of a dictionary definition? Because if you go to the Oxford and look up Charles Justin, you won't find anything there. But I thought the CV was ideal because in many ways they're sort of similar in character. And my kids, when they looked at it, they sort of said, but that's not you. And I said, that's right, that's the point. It is not me, it's only part of me. And they do the same thing because essentially what they both do is they only look at what you've done. Yeah. They only look at what you've done. Because even if you look at the chair definition, it's sort of quantitative. It doesn't talk about the quality of the chair. Like, is the chair comfortable? Is it well designed? Is it well made? Has it got some aesthetic value to it? All it is, it's sort of like 4 legs and a seat and back, and you sit on it, right? That's a chair. And in some ways, that's what a CV is. And I remember someone saying that there are 2 ways to live your life. One is to live your life as a CV, and one is to live your life as a eulogy. And the difference is that with a CV, you have, like I have, all the things that you've done in your life, but with a eulogy, what they do is they talk about what sort of person you were. You know, like, were you a good son, were you a good father, were you a good husband, good friend, good colleague, whether you're charitable, good person. So I've got these 4 geniuses. They are, I believe, really geniuses, and each of them had really not a very good personal life. And you sometimes wonder why that's the case. And one of the reasons is that one of the reasons they achieved what they managed to achieve was the total focus that they placed on their pursuit, to the point that they sacrificed their personal relationships and their friendships and all those sorts of things to make that happen. And I was going to tell the story, but I was running out of time, but I'll tell you anyway. When I retired from architecture, I said to Leah, it's your fault that I didn't become a great architect. And I knew I wasn't great. I was very successful, but I wasn't a great architect. And I said, and the reason is that I loved you and the children too much, and I just didn't have enough focus on my architecture. And she thought about it, and literally it was 5 nanoseconds, and she said, no, that's not the reason, you just weren't talented enough. And you know what? She was right. So, let's talk about abstraction. Now, if you're interested in understanding abstraction, you should have a look at the video posted on JAHM last week, I think it was, on Jared Haberfield's. Jared's here, who spoke, and he gave the most fantastic rendition on abstraction, and he talked about the 3 threads of abstraction. I'm going to present 3 threads which are different to his, because that's what art does. Everyone's got their own opinion about things. So my definition of abstraction, which is much broader, is that it represents an idea in some physical form. And that's one of the characteristics which actually defines humans from other life forms. We have this capacity to imagine something and turn it into something concrete, right? And I've got this picture of Manhattan, because if you look at that, I mean, that's 40,000 years just after that cave painting, and you can see the progress. And that's made possible with all the developments and inventions and creations that man has made to make that possible. But not only in a physical sense, but also in the intangible sense. You know, like things like language is an abstraction, writing is an abstraction, God is an abstraction, government is an abstraction, money is an abstraction. You know, all these things which are sort of like the sort of soft infrastructure that makes our lives possible. Even the Central Park here is an abstraction. So you think to yourself, how does it apply to art? Okay, so my 3 threads are that what art does, because art is a form of representation, right? And so the first one is representing the physical world. And that is in 2 subgroups. One is using realistic expression, and the other one is non-realistic or semi-realistic. So actually, all the realism artwork that you see, they are abstractions. And that's hit home by this painting by Magritte, because there's an amazing painting by Guerrico of the raft of the Medusa, but he wasn't there. He made that up, right? Based on the information he had. It is a construct. So Magritte has got a painting of a pipe and say this is not a pipe. Of course it's not a pipe. It's a painting of a pipe, right? So it's an abstraction. So if you go down to Impressionism and Cubism, they are actually representing the real world, but not necessarily literally. So the next thread is representing the non-physical world, the intangible world. And you have these artists here, and things like spirituality and psychology with the surrealists, the experiential, the intuitive, the philosophical. These are other forms. And now we have the next phase, which is art, which says we're not actually representing anything. The art object is it. It's not representing it. And there's a famous quote by Donald Judd, who did these works here. He's saying, you should look at my art as if you look at a chair. And basically, it has no meaning. And the same with Yves Klein, who invented ultramarine blue and patented it. And you can see here, he had monochromes, and even on the floor there, there's a painting, but there's no paint there. It's actually ultramarine pigment. And there his focus was on colour. That colour. His whole career was on that colour, on ultramarine blue. And when you look at this sort of minimalist work, which is sort of has no meaning, which is not to say you can't derive meaning for it. There was no intended meaning. So what's fascinating is, together with those artists who are actually those minimalists who are working in that sort of genre, was at the same time with the presentation of the philosophy as existentialism, which is similar. They're saying is that life has no meaning. The meaning is what you actually create. And we'll talk a bit more about that. Because very much I'm in that camp. Very much, I don't think that life has meaning. I'm agnostic, don't believe in the soul, don't believe in the spirit. No. This is it. It is what it is. And this is one of the messages that's coming out from this. Okay, so let's have a look now as to what this all means. So one of the things that you need to look at this is that the physical, visual and verbal translates to how I look, who I am and what I've done. Now, today, to do a portrait, you don't need how you look or what you've done, because all that stuff's on the internet. So why would you bother putting it into a portrait? So the challenge of the portrait is to represent who you are. So let's see how we do that. So there are clues. There are clues. So obviously, looking at that photograph, I'm a male. Although in today's world, that's also questionable. And there's blue, right? So blue could mean, blue is a colour associated with males. Blue is also a colour associated with being cool. So I'm regarded as being cool. Not cool as in hip, but cool as being unemotional. And and then when you look at the CV, there are certain aspects there which I think are relevant to who I am. One is the fact that I'm Jewish. The other one is that I'm an architect. And the other one is that I'm involved in art. And that I was involved in JAHM. So, why Jewish? Well, the Jews were the people who actually introduced the idea of an abstract God. And when you think about this was 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, when gods then were sort of either pantheistic or animistic. I mean, it was so radical a revolution. Imagine someone coming along and say, well, your God is actually, you can't see him, you can't touch him, you can't feel him, you don't know him. That's like the total abstraction. And I think what's happened is Jews living with this idea for 4,000, it's part of their DNA. Which explains why, I collect abstract art. But look at these people are Jewish artists, right? And that doesn't take into account Einstein with his theory of relativity and Freud with his idea of consciousness and subconsciousness. That all is from this capacity to imbue yourself in abstraction. Architect, right? I grew up in the age of modernism, and Corbusier was one of the gods, even for an agnostic like me, right? So, and he came up with this idea of the modular man, which was based on the concept of the golden mean. And And these were sort of these formula for proportions which actually provided the greatest form of beauty, right? So I said, okay, that's fine, I understand that. My painting, the dimensions of my self-portrait conform to the golden mean, right? Now, one of the things you have to understand about the Archibald, the entry form has zero explanation as to what it's about. The only information you provide is the name of the artist, the name of the subject, the dimensions, and a few other details. There's and the name of the work. So I put as much information in the name of the work as I could, but still obviously it wasn't enough, right? And I understand for some people the way, like the trustees, who are all busy people, don't forget, because they're all sort of top corporate people, how are they going to go through? Last year I think it was 2,000 entries, and this year it was about just under 1,000. I understand they sit there in a row, where the attendants bring the artist, and sort of they either thumbs down or thumbs up. It's like the Colosseum, right? So, so anything with any inherent complexity, I think, doesn't get to first base. So it's all basically that sort of visceral first view that you look at, and so I'm sure they didn't pick up that this conformed to the golden mean. And this goes back to the theory is based on, if you look at the constructs in nature, that a lot of elements in nature conform to this sort of magic formula. Humans are always looking for some magic formula which explains how the world works for them, and everything is, but I've even read articles that it's all bullshit. So, now, so getting back, anyone who knows us and JAHM will know ultramarine blue plays a big role here. So it's part of the architecture. We've also got this painting in the exhibition by Kalmanyuchenko, and we've got the portrait. So how's it possible? Now, and the thing is, they all painted the same. Look, there I am painting the two works, right? It's the same paint, same roller, same technique. How can they all be different? Well, Linda Wachtel is here. I asked her the same question, and she answered, well, it's a question of intent, but it's also a question of context, right? So the wall is part of the architecture. Or someone said, I asked somebody, can the wall be a work of art? They said, yeah. A mural, you can have a mural on the wall, right? So this mural is a monochrome. So, but really it's a work of architecture. The work by Kalmanyuchenko is part of an exhibition on minimalism, and this is an entry in a portrait prize, right? And it didn't get disqualified, right? So it got rejected, but it didn't get disqualified, right? And that's the thing, it's context. And in some ways I remind you of Deschamps, who put the urinal into the museum, and that became a work of art because of the context that actually demonstrated what it was. So as a collector, you can see this is what we collect, and in many ways, I think art collections tend to be a signifier of the personality of the person who collects. I sort of think, you don't need to go to see a psychiatrist. You just send them your catalogue, and they can work out who you are by just looking at the art that you collect. And so definitely this would justify the portrait. So similar to Eve Pine Blue, one of the things you have to understand about colour is colour actually, when you're born, it's neutral, and your attitudes to colour are actually culturally mandated. So what we think of blue is different to what they might think of blue in, say, Asia or in Africa or things like this. And this is a sort of quite an intensive psychological study of what blue represents, right? Ranging from all this positive aspect to a psychopath at the end. And I think I could be all of these, depending on who I've actually come across and dealt with. But, you know, in some ways I think this is a little bit like astrology, you know, people working out characters based on the day you're born and under what star sign you are. But that alone, I think, would say a lot about who I am, just by the fact I have this fixation on ultramarine blue. So, getting back to the exhibition, where the two bylines are less is more and nothing is something. So, when you look at this portrait, there's not much going on, but I've just spent nearly an hour speaking about it. So, you know, I think if you look at less is more, it's not dissimilar to the dichotomy between simplicity and complexity. Just because something is simple doesn't mean it's not complex. And I think the portrait is like, you look at a person, you know, I'm a great believer that art is sort of like a mirror on the human condition. If you look at a person, you don't really know what they're like. You know, under that sort of exterior, there is a lot going on, and the only way you can get to know them is you have to get to know them. And so I think this work actually fits into that whole concept of less is more. But then nothing is something. Okay. This is sort of getting back to this existential idea. Between the two polarities between birth and death is existence, is when we exist. Before birth, we don't exist, and after death, we don't exist. So if you want to actually rename that, between nothing is something. Someone told me, you know, life is a dash. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, when you go to the cemetery and you look at a gravestone, you see their date of birth and you see their date of their death, and in between there's a dash. That dash represents their life, right? And let me tell you, at 78, I look back on my life, I think it's a dash, because I sort of think, oh my God, it's like yesterday, and all these things have happened, and where did time go? And so that is something. Your life is something, but what is that something? You know? Now, if we live 60, 80, 100 years, the fact is, relative to the existence of the universe, which is sitting at, I think, 14 billion years, it's next to nothing. It's next to nothing. Our lifespan is next to nothing. And so consequently you get quite nihilistic about what life is about. But I actually take the opposite view. And this is where existential come in. We have agency. We can actually make our life the way we want it to be. We have that power to do it. Sure, you know, you can compromise by circumstances, but nonetheless, we have that capacity to shape our lives to the image that we aspire to. So when I look at that, I see that as a symbol of what you can actually do with regard to creating a life. So in some ways, if you look at your life like a blank canvas, you are the artist who can create the life. So I ended up with a blue monochrome. Now, in many ways, that blue monochrome 40,000 years later is not dissimilar in intent to this handprint in the cave. Because essentially I'm saying the same thing. I'm here, I've lived a life, you know, all the things that encapsulate that life. One of my favourite mantras is, I did say, you only live once. And as a consequence, I've always had this sort of, I suppose, desire to live every day to the full. But I came across this cartoon, of all places, Instagram, which proved that I was wrong. So, my mother died at 98. So my calculations, I've got 20 years to go. And I've calculated that's over 7,000 days. And I'm going to make the most of it.